We are recording. I'm Steve Goldberg, history teacher at Research Triangle High School. If y'all could introduce yourselves briefly.
Yep, I'm Joe Steeb, history teacher at East Chapel Hill.
Matt Cohn, I teach social studies at Carborough High.
Awesome. And I'm going to share my screen now so that we can talk about a piece that Joe just wrote. Congratulations, Joe, in the Washington Post. My students will look at this piece a little bit more. I'm not going to read the whole piece in this video, but I actually, Joe, that might be cool. Do you mind reading this out loud, just starting with one NBC News poll?
Sure. So one NBC News poll conducted from March 11th to 13th showed that only 56% of Democrats and 20% of Republicans thought their daily lives would change significantly in the near future. More recently, a poll showed that more than 3 out of 4 Republicans believe the media has exaggerated the risk of the virus. Only 61% of Democrats and a paltry 30% of Republicans plan to stop attending large public gatherings. Business owners in Washington, D.C., Illinois, Nashville, and Philadelphia have pledged to defy government orders to shut down. The Republican governor of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, notoriously tweeted a photo of himself and his children at a restaurant on Saturday, proclaiming, "Eating with my kids and all my fellow Oklahomans, it's packed tonight." These divides leave Democrats especially furious that their political opponents aren't taking the crisis seriously.
So that's great stuff. And what I would ask my students is, how do you know any of this stuff, right? So there's some NBC News poll, and if I click here, oh, it's from Vox.com.
Mm-hmm.
And this you said here, 3 out of 4 Republicans believe that the media exaggerated the risk of the virus. How do you know that? Oh, you got it from CNN, who did some incredible reporting on that. You don't have a citation for, oh yeah, you do. Business owners in Washington, D.C., Illinois, Nashville, and Philadelphia. You didn't go talk to all those business owners, right? You didn't like go out in the world and talk to them, but you got it from thehill.com. And some reporter there went out and did that. And you didn't talk to the Republican governor of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, but CNN did. Yeah. And so I can tell those 4 sources are where you got your information from. And we were just talking about how important it is for students to cite their sources. So I guess, could you just talk a little bit about how you got this piece in the Washington Post and how much work you had to do to put it together?
Sure. So I think you'll be surprised at how easy it is to get in contact with editors at various websites. I mean, they are trying to churn out a lot of content. And at the Washington Post, this Made by History blog is for historians, history teachers, history graduate students. They usually publish 2 or 3 articles a day. So they're looking for people to email them and to say, I have an idea, what do you think, right? And part of the reason why in history class we work on developing short thesis statements and short pitches for things is so you can write that kind of pitch to an editor, say in 2 or 3 sentences, here's what I want to say. So I emailed the editor at Washington Post, Made by History, and said, I have an idea. I think it's relevant. I think it connects to some interesting history.
Can I interrupt you for 1 sec?
Yeah.
Just selfishly for my students. From my students' perspective, that's what your introduction is. It's like a pitch.
Yes.
It's why should I care? Why is this topic important? And that's what you need to do. That's a skill that you need to have throughout your life, not just for a history project that you hopefully do, but may or may not care so much about. That's why you need a compelling intro, and that's what Joe had to do to the Washington Post for them to say, yeah, we want you to develop this. We want you to write this. Matt, do you want to chime in on anything here?
No, well, the one thing that I'm intrigued by is, of course, that you use numbers. So that it's just a lot more powerful than saying a lot of Democrats or few Republicans. Because I think most of us will do the math and say, like, holy cow, that's a huge gap.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we broaden that out, that's being more precise and giving specific details, which is something I'm sure we all have been talking about all year in our classes, rather than many Americans believed that prohibition was a great thing. Like, how do you know that? And who did you talk to? And what's your source for knowing that? So yeah, to the extent you can use numbers or to broaden that out to be more precise, that's great.
Yeah. And one thing I always encourage students to do is imagine the reader of your essay of whatever, not having a lot of time on their hands, because whenever you're pitching something to someone, you want to get something published, you want to get someone to adopt your idea, your business plan, it could be anything. It's almost always going to be someone with more power than you, more access, and less time, right? And that's why you need to be able to come up with those short, concise statements of what you want to say that are very accurate. And then second, you always want to imagine that reader being skeptical. And if you provide this kind of specific information, that reduces their skepticism, and they say, okay, this person's describing the world as it really is, right? And then you can go on and say, here's the significance of whatever aspect of the world.
And how long would you say you worked on this piece?
I'd say drafting it took about 2 or 3 hours. It's about 1,000 words, the draft. And then the editor and I, or actually 2 editors and I, went through maybe 3 full revisions. So I probably read it personally 5 times for editing purposes. And the editors gave me, the first draft was just covered in corrections. It was like every other sentence had a correction, or can you be more specific here? Can you give me a quote? Right. So like what came out in the article looks so different. And it's really just a testament. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I'm trying to get my students, they had a draft that was due in February. And they looked at like why the course doesn't end until a while. I'm like, no, I want you to really do some serious revisions. And that's why it's important to get a draft in so that you can get some feedback and then not just make cosmetic changes, but actually, like, if we go to I can pull up your piece in the post. How did you come up with the intro? Like, was that initially your intro, or No,
not at all. The original intro was much more about historians. It really started with the stuff about citizenship, but the editor said, well, look, this is not for an academic audience, this is for a public audience, and you want to start by saying, this is the situation, this is what people are thinking and doing about coronavirus, because they don't want to read about historians, they want to read about the relevance of history for the present day. So it's totally different.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna, again, selfishly so my students think I'm a little crazy because I'm asking them to write, if you were in my class, Joe, I would have asked you to write it this way. And
yeah.
So that I can tell that that's from Vox, this is from CNN, this is from thehill.com, and this is from CNN.com. And we can make it pretty later on, but for me as a teacher, that makes sense to me. Could you guys as teachers corroborate that Mr. Goldberg is not insane? Please.
Matt, you want to start?
Wait, he's not insane. He may or may not have paid us to appear on this video, but he is not. One thing I want to say beyond the sources, which is really good, it's clear to me like you closed with a particularly interesting quote. I think that we all had a strong opinion when we saw that tweet by the governor of Oklahoma. So it's a fantastic way to pull your reader in. And of course, I think most of us were pretty frustrated with him. And I even think that he had to downplay that after a day or two. So that's how you hook a reader. I sometimes see students when they struggle, they'll ask a bunch of rhetorical questions. Have you ever? And my answer is always no, I haven't wondered that. But this, I have thought about this governor and I have strong feelings about his actions.
I know that some of my students really haven't been following the news. Matt, do you mind giving just like a thumbnail? What did this governor do that got people's attention so much?
Right. So I think it was, I'm just trying to remember, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday night that the NBA canceled the season, that Tom Hanks came down with coronavirus, that a lot of things in American society started to shift. Well, this is several days later than that.
Yeah.
And the governor of Oklahoma tweets a photo of himself and his 2 young kids, and they're in a restaurant, and it is packed, as he says, and they seem blissfully unaware of what's going on in our society. And not only that, but of course, he's promoting it to a large audience. He sees this as a strength. And like I suspect, this tweet is sort of a proxy for how much he agrees with Trump. And so he's appealing to his base. But from a public health perspective, it's just infuriating because if his kids have grandparents, that's a very irresponsible thing for them to be doing. And actually, if they're just for lack of a better term, not schmucks, that's a very irresponsible.
Yeah.
Okay. I think, Joe, do you want to say anything else about the piece here? I'm not sure what I have. We may be editing this last part out. Oh, we did that, and particularly in the era of fake news, and we talked about that. Maybe just say a little bit about that in this age of fake news. Why is it so important to say more than ever where you get your information from? I'll just let people riff on that for a minute, and then this is a long enough video.
Well, let me. This might be helpful for students. So I say to my students, when you cite a source, what you're citing is your connection to reality, right? Your connection to someone who's actually saying, doing, or thinking something. And there are many people, sometimes there are historians in archives, there are journalists doing interviews, journalists hunting things down the ground. And now, of course, you have people tweeting things, posting things, right? This vast expansion of knowledge. And when you cite something, you're saying, okay, we can take this down to the ground level to something that actually happened. And that's like, so for example, you follow the Hill website, right? The Hill reporter did not actually go out and go to Nashville and go to Philadelphia and go to Illinois, right? But he did read the local sources, right? Like the local Nashville news, the local Illinois or Chicago news. And he found those stories from local reporters who were on the ground, who did go to the places, right? And they're saying this happened, right? And that's how you build up a sense of reality that's actually accurate. And, if you think about, I don't know, I'll give you a good example, the Gateway Pundit, right? Or even on the left, Occupy Democrats, right? That's someone who's going around the internet picking out things that fit their preconceived worldview. It's very different than what a journalist does. It's very different than what a historian does. And so that's why you cite things, is to show the difference between someone who's building an accurate view of the world and someone who's building a view of the world that just fits with what they already think.
And what I've told my students is Wikipedia is a great place to start from. And oftentimes it is, and it can lead you to other sources. But if you're citing Wikipedia a lot in your final project or even in your draft, I'm a little worried because I feel like you haven't dug in enough. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I start with, that's one of the reasons I love teaching the OJ story, right? Because it teaches them how to corroborate evidence. Who was there? Do their stories match up, right? It's very much historical evidence. If you only go to one source or one witness, you're really not getting a very good sense of what actually happened.
For context, if people see this later on, you started the year with.
Sorry.
No, do you want to just explain that?
Oh, I start the year for my seniors with a unit about the O.J. Simpson case that's all about thinking about evidence and thinking about the relevance of one story for a larger context.
Matt, you have any thoughts on fake news era, citing sources?
Yeah, I mean, more the fake news, and even here it's a little bit of a tangent, but I mentioned earlier that I think that sometimes when people tweet the stuff out, like it is a proxy for a different question, right? So I remember a few years ago when they would ask, and I'm not trying to pick on one side, but when they would ask like Fox News viewers or Tea Party folks, do you think that President Obama was born in the United States? And an incredibly high percentage would say, no, I don't think he was born in the United States. And I always suspected that basically meant, I just hate this guy. And then if you said to those folks, look, I'll give you $1 million if you get this question right. Do you think he was born in the US? That they would give you a different answer because they use less motivated reason, right? So I'm looking at these numbers, and I suspect they've changed even since you wrote the piece. I suspect that when push came to shove, business owners did close down. Governors and mayors did modify what they were saying, right? But at that point, you could still get away with just appealing to your base with something pretty close to propaganda.
Yeah, and actually, let me add to that, because this is what makes editing so important, right? So like I started the first draft of this with a totally different set of data and of polls. And the editor said, this is already obsolete. Like people are obviously already changing their behavior. And so like, you can't just start your thing with this. So I had to update my data and I had to qualify it. I had to say, literally the next sentence at the end of this paragraph is, we should probably expect people to change their behavior as things get worse, right? So that's my big qualification of all of this information, right? Is that people are not going to be that stupid going forward, probably. So that's not something that I came up with. That's the editor, right? So that's what makes this back and forth drafting process so important.
So listen to your teachers when they give you feedback. And I think honestly, like, get feedback from a friend. Like, if this is a weird year and I'm not sure how much more work we're going to actually get done, but if we had been in class, I was going to have folks read each other's work and give some feedback and say, oh, I got confused in this paragraph, or I didn't understand what you were saying here. I want more of paragraph 3, right?
Yeah.
Tell me more about this story. That's really interesting. Maybe that's what your piece is really about, and that you don't know often when you're writing history what the most interesting thing is until you start to dig into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to stop recording because this is already pretty long. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share for posterity? This is a good start.
Well, I guess I have a quick question for you. You know, you talked about how it evolved. Was that primarily how you ended up introducing it, or were there changes even later on in the piece?
Yeah, there were just changes throughout the piece. It was, there's not enough evidence here. You need an example here. He said that one thing was specious.
Okay.
So, you know, it's like maybe half of the draft survived.
You know, I think we probably hide that from students. We probably make it seem oftentimes that, well, the really good writers, they only get a few comments on the margins, but
heck no.
Struggling writers get part, and you're saying, no, actually it happens to all of us.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna pull up the article in here. This will be interesting. Can you all see that?
Yep.
So this is the piece, and you got an empty mall. Did you get to pick that picture?
Nope, I didn't pick the title either.
Okay. Do you like the title?
It's fine.
Okay. But then this, if you talk here about in the past few days, federal and state governments have intensified. Well, you read it. It's yours. Do you want to read it?
In the past few days. Well, I can read it. In the past few days, federal and state governments have intensified anti-coronavirus measures, closing schools and imposing restrictions on business activity and socializing. Although Americans are waking up to this peril, that's like a qualification, there's been significant resistance to disruptions of normal life, despite the dire warnings of health experts.
And the dire warnings here. So your thesis. Whoops, I didn't click that. Your thesis is what? What's your? I'm going to not necessarily show this to students, but when you wrote this piece, what was your main point? What do you want to get across?
The thesis is that we've become habitualized since maybe the 50s to think of consumption as one of our main responsibilities of citizenship, and to oppose top-down, even temporary government restrictions on our daily life.
And because
or government calls for sacrifice. And because of that, we are reacting very slowly to the necessity for social distancing and other kinds of sacrifice is a strong word, inconveniences.
Gotcha. And I assume your hope in writing it was to get people to say, hey, he's right. We need to sacrifice more the way the greatest generation did, the way people sacrificed for the common good during World War II and in other moments in US history when people did step up.
Yeah, or even I kind of wanted to stay away from the generational thing, because that becomes very political right away, because some people will say, oh, the great generation was so great, and then other people say, no, they really weren't so great, and then everyone says, okay, boomer, and then it becomes that becomes a mudslinging,
So my father's 86, and I'm worried about him. He lives in Florida. He's in fine health, but if he gets the coronavirus, that will be very bad. But when he was born in 1934, so he told me about these rationing coupons that he had growing up, and you can only get so much meat and only so much gasoline. And that's the sort of sacrifice that, whether the greatest generation or not, that people made for the war effort in World War II. And if I understood your piece right, that you're saying we haven't really had to do that in the past 70 or so years.
Yeah, it's that we still volunteer on a large basis, and we still value public service, right? I mean, all of us became teachers, and for I assume that was part of that reason. But it's more that the government saying we need to do this as a collective, and you really don't have any choice, and it's gonna last more than a couple of weeks, which it probably will. That I'm saying that that's a new thing in the historical consciousness of most Americans for these reasons X, Y, and Z.
Cool. Thank you guys so much. I'm gonna hit end recording.